This is the heart of cycling. This is where it all began. Forget all that racing in Australia in January, moving across to the Asian continent, then through the rest of February. It still starts here in Belgium.
You know, if I'm honest, I hated this race. I absolutely hated being at this race. I mean, of course, I have great memories of winning stages and doing good for my teammates. But man, for the most part, I mean, the amount of stress that you go through just to finish these sprint stages, and it doesn't look like much on television, but when you're packed in there like sardines, it's freezing cold, you're standing on the line and it's raining. It's just not a nice experience many times. It's a really, like Paul said, a very hard race.
Well, hello everybody and welcome another week, and here we are back on Beyond the Podium. I'm Phil Liggett, and today we thought we'd talk about the upcoming Paris-Nice, what we've always called the race to the sun in the past and still is, and hopefully this year after a cold winter that will be the case again. And we'll also look back on a fine weekend of classic racing in Belgium. And of course I'm joined by the man who is a great pro and knows most of these races the hard way, with the pain in the bum. And that's Christian Vande. Christian, it's been a good weekend of racing, but I thought a rather curious weekend of racing. Not quite what I expected.
No, not. I mean, I don't think anyone did, Phil. I mean, in fact, the person who actually won the race on Saturday, Omloop, wasn't even supposed to be on the start list. He was taking course, and he substituted one of his teammates. And I think what you're alluding to is the group sprint and how big the group was coming to the finish line. So many years in the past, you always see at least 1 to 3 people off the front, and then a bigger sprint for 4th place, 5th place for the lesser places. But this year, that was a massive sprint to the finish line. Soren Wernskjold, big boy, make it to the line, and that was a big upset. Usually you'd see Soren going for Sunday's race. Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne, almost always a sprint to the finish line. The last 50K is pretty flat, nothing to talk about. But I'm with you. I think this is just showing how deep the Peloton is in general going into the classics. And to make the difference these days, I don't know, Phil, you got to take a shortcut these days to get the better on the rest of the Peloton.
Well, the big names saying they were going to ride those 2 classics, like Remco Evenepoel. He didn't show up, of course. And then you've got riders like Wout van Aert, who was really saying he was going to go for it. And he worked very, very hard, but he couldn't break this peloton. He was driving over those small little climbs, which Belgium are famous for at this time of the year, and getting absolutely nowhere. And I think we had a bunch of around about a 50 up bunch sprint coming down to the finish in Het Nieuwsblad. And what's his name, Van Aert, could only finish in 11th place. He spent himself trying to break that field up. They refused to crack. They were very tenacious.
Yeah, I agreed. And I felt there's a bit of a disconnect in the Visma camp as well. Matteo Jorgenson kind of alluding to that a little bit. But I think what Matteo's mindset is correct. Whereas last year they went on guns blazing, winning these races, and then kind of petered out in the big races, the Tour of Flanders and Roubaix, where you really want to be firing on all cylinders. So yeah, they're missing some big boys though. Let's not forget they're missing Christophe Laporte and Dylan van Baarle. And those are massive engines, massive talent that they don't have at their side right now. But I just saw Matteo and I saw Wout, and it seemed like they were not on the same page. They're trying to get on the same page, but this is the semi-classics. These aren't the ultimate classics that we're going to see a little bit later on. So if you're going to have bad days as far as the team goes, and look, their bad days are a dream for somebody else. But, we expect a lot of these gentlemen out there on the race course, especially in these kind of classics with Wout. So I still am quite bullish on that team, and I think they're going to get together. But more to your point, though, I think what we saw was the depth of Peloton, how fast they're going and how hard it was to truly make the difference. I mean, Flanders is going to be different, of course, later on. And we have plenty other, Gent-Wevelgem. And then, of course, we have Roubaix. So I think there's plenty of time for people to really think about how they're going to make those differences. But it's going to be interesting for the mindsets going into the races, knowing how deep the Peloton is.
Well, the one man who did excel, I think, was Jasper Philipsen, because he got 3rd and then he went 2 better when he went to Kuurne, and he got the win there. And that was his first win of the season. And, this guy's been knocking on the door. And I think he's getting himself really hyped up for when he takes on Mathieu van der Poel in Paris Roubaix. Second to Van der Poel the last 2 years. That's never happened before. the same rider being second to the same winner. And Van der Poel going, of course, for something of a record 3 in a row. He'll join a few great names there if he does it in Paris Roubaix. But Philipsen, I think, is sprint in Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne. And that was a big bunch too. That was over 90 riders coming down to the sprint there as well. Again, another race normally too fast for a big peloton to survive. His sprint was perfection.
And of his teammates. I mean, let's not forget about it. If we're going to talk about sprint, yes, no doubt.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, the lead out. Wow. I mean, I think he only had to sprint for, I think, the time for 8 seconds. It's not much of a sprint, but yeah, it was impressive to see them line it out. And you know what always gets me, Phil, is I get nervous watching these guys with 1,200 meters to go, 1,500 meters to go. And I was looking for Jasper, the disaster Philipsen, looking, where is he at? And he was pretty far back. But when these guys have confidence, it's when you don't see them. That's when they're always going to win. And right there, when they needed to be at the front with 500 meters to go, all the boys were all lined up right at the last minute, and it was impressive. So, yeah, like you said, though, third place on Saturday, first place on Sunday, going away, clean set of wheels across the line. It's looking really good for not only himself, but his entire team. And Matthew, he did a strange move for him even this morning, saying that he's going to go and race Les Amis on Tuesday, so tomorrow. I don't want to date this podcast, but it's not common for a rider of his stature to have a last minute entry into some of these races. So maybe just feels he needs to polish the sword a little bit going into these classics, what he saw on television, or he feels like he's missing out, one of the two. But I'll say that Epson team looks really good right now.
I think a lot of guys have got good condition. They've been training pretty hard. And there was more hype than I can recall in recent years on these opening 2 classics, as if Europe wanted to say, hey, this is the heart of cycling. This is where it all began. Forget all that racing in Australia in January, moving across to the Asian continent, then through the rest of February. It still starts here in Belgium. There were big crowds, of course, and there was a lot more hype than there has been in recent years on these races. And I think a lot of riders would have liked to have scored heavily there. A lot of determined, fit men. Now, over here in Europe, we've had a pretty rough old winter with a lot of rain around and severely cold days. But Belgium, the home of the bad weather, it was a beautiful day for Het Nieuwsblad. I didn't actually see Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne, so I don't know how good the weather was there. But it was a lovely weekend, I think, in Belgium, and that's made a big difference. I think they're trying to bring the sport of cycling back to Europe, the riders, I mean, as well.
I don't disagree with that at all. And I feel like this has been a long time coming. When I was racing back in the dark ages of what it's been only 12 years, but it feels like 1,000 years, Phil. No one really paid too much mind to some of these races. Okay, the opening weekend was always a big deal, but Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne, not so much. But we're talking about E3 and some of the races in between the true classics. Those have so much weight now that they didn't have before. Even Tour of Flanders. You tell somebody about Tour of Flanders, be like, yeah, whatever. I'm like, dude, you have no idea. And then now we have so many more, at least Americans, understanding and appreciating what's going on over there. Paris Roubaix has always been the one thing that I could say as an American, say, do you know Paris Roubaix? Do you know the Tour de France? Do you know Phil Liggett? Yes. And then we go on from there. But those were the 2 races that everyone truly would know, the Calvastones, because it was just such an incredible spectacle to see. But now we're seeing that across the board with all these they were smaller races, but now I agree with you. Massive crowds, even more so than they were before. And what Tour of Flanders has done when they changed the course to make it circuits, which I didn't know, and I wasn't so either. A lot of people were very much so against. But if you've ever been there, Phil, the VIP and the way they do it so professionally, it is so much fun, and they just do it correctly. And then, of course, the boys put on an incredible show, and there's no shortage of talent out there these days racing these classics.
And there's a lot more coming along now. You talk about everyone knowing about me and the boys. What about you, Christian Vande Velde? So we're now going to talk Paris-Nice, a race which is now getting a bit old, actually, 83 editions by the time we started at the weekend. And you rode it once. And do you ever remember the city of Saint-Étienne in France? I'm guessing now, but I think it was stage 4 coming from... Nevers, was it Nevers? Do you remember where it came from? Anyway, it was going to Saint-Étienne, which is the bicycle capital of the world at the time. And you won on your own by 14 seconds. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember it quite well, Phil. It was a crazy week. You know, we had a interesting team. Bradley Wiggins was back on our team back then. He was up there in the prologue. I actually crashed pretty hard in the prologue, and I was pretty down on
There's no
myself. And then,
surprise there, Christian. There's no
yeah,
surprise when that.
I know. But I was going a little bit too quick in the wet. But long story short, I didn't want to attack. I didn't even think about attacking and going to the breakaway that day. But it was a horrible day, like usual. And we'll get into the weather, Paris-Nice. I mean, you can pretty much count on it that it's going to be cold and wet at some point in time in Paris-Nice. And there was no difference that day going into Saint Etienne, and found myself in a strong breakaway, and just felt better and better throughout the course of the week. And that day was the big exception, just to have the chance to get up the front, really test my legs, because it was a horrible winter in Chicago that year. So I had no confidence, Phil, whatsoever. I got my teeth kicked in a Tour of California. I thought it'd be the same thing at Paris-Nice. And yeah, it was one of my favorite victories to finish right in front of Contador. Came pretty close. Yeah, I had to really think of and embrace my inner Jens Voigt. You know, what would Jens do right now? He would attack his own attack, and pretty much that's what I did. But yeah, good memories. But that was a long time ago, Phil. Coming into this edition, it's going to be a very hard edition.
Well, that was 2009. Now, there's only two people I've commentated on who've actually rocked the imaginary baby as they've won stages. The other one is Neil Stevens, who rode for the Onse team, the Australian, because his wife had just had a child, and I believe his wife had just had a child as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks. I forgot about that. That was Madeline.
Forgot about it. You'd be in trouble tonight.
I know. Maddie had just been born a couple of weeks before that in Chicago. So yeah, that didn't help out with my preparation. Yeah. So now I remember. Thank you very much, Philly, making me look horrible. And so now she's already 16 years old and driving a car. So yeah, making both of us feel old.
Yeah. But wait till you get to my age, then you know what old really feels like. So let's talk about this race this year, and it's got a good field, of course. It's a race which I can't believe. You talk about when you won your stage. I actually covered the race for about 20 years, and I've now not seen it for the last 30 years. So that's how time flies. When I first got to see Paris-Nice, and it's where I met Paul Sherwin and invited him to become a TV commentator alongside me. When he was on the Promenade des Anglais at the end of the tour he was riding, I think it was 83 at the time. And I said, Paul, I heard you're retiring. He said, well, I'm retiring from the European scene, but I'm going to go back home and race for a couple of seasons. I said, okay. I said, well, whoever you're signing for in Britain, put a little note in your contract, no work in July, no cycling in July. And I'll see if I can bring you to the Tour de France. And that's exactly what happened. In fact, his sponsor to be telephoned me and said, Phil, I've been talking with Paul Sherwin, and he says he can't race in July. I said, so you're the guy who signed him? I said, I didn't know it was you, George. And he says, yeah, we're going to take him on for 2 years, during which time Paul won 2 national titles as a pro. And the result was, of course, Paul joined us and eventually found us his way to NBC and Peacock. By the way, I must remind our viewers, too, listeners on this occasion, that we will be covering the Tour de France with Christian and with Bob Roll, who have just come back from skiing together, thankfully. And did I say Tour de France? I think we'll stick with Paris-Nice now. And sorry about that. You never corrected me, Christian. Anyway, you guys are doing it on Peacock every day, and there's some lovely stages. Now, looking at the route, this is very similar to a route that Vingegaard rode a couple of years ago, and it has a team time trial on it. Only I think it's 4 kilometers further than the one in the race that he won at the time. And so I'm just wondering if this is actually a real course for him. Got to say, the field is good, but it's not great, is my opinion. I think Tirreno Adriatico possibly has a slightly stronger field with Tom Pidcock and a few others going there. But I think this is the race to always ride. First, to impress the Tour de France, so you make sure you get an invite to the Tour. And secondly, of course, because it really is a race to the sun.
Agreed. It's hard to say. This is a debate that goes on for years on end, Phil, about who has the better field, Paris-Nice or Tirreno Adriatico, who has the harder stages, one of the two. But I think this year it's pretty easy to see that Paris-Nice is definitely going to be the hardest one. First of all, it's 1 day extra. Tirreno Adriatico has a prologue. That's 1 day pretty much you could write off. And even if you're just looking at the previous editions, this has much more kilometers climbing in the last 5 kilometers, meaning that it's going up to a summit finish many more times. And if you look at the hardest stages, easily stage number 7, almost 3,800 meters of climbing, so 13,000-ish feet or so out there climbing. That's a hard day, and especially in the early seasons. And they should be able to back it up day after day after day. And I always say the biggest difference in Paris-Nice is that there's never any time just to relax on the bike. It's always stressful. It's a little bit of chance of crosswinds. It's cold out there, smaller roads in France. So it is a great prep race. I feel like I would say that this has a little bit of a feather in its cap above Tirreno Adriatico as far as prestige goes, for a little bit harder. But Tirreno Adriatico has the best trophy, bar none, with a trident, and that's for sure. You can't argue that. But the racing itself, and I definitely tip my cap to Paris-Nice. But like you said, though, we have the TTT. And then we have those 3 days where you finish up on summits. And that's going to be a little bit different, a lot harder. And my biggest question is Jonas going to work for Matteo, who's going to be wearing the number 1 who won last year? And what Matteo has done for him in the Tour de France. But then we're talking about the actual stages itself. It's a lot harder than it was last year when Matteo won the race, with Brad McNulty being right behind him, Schelmos and Buitrago. So I think for the pure climber, it makes it a little bit easier. So I would definitely think about Jonas going for the win here today, but you never know. Matteo looked fantastic. We didn't talk about him too much in the opening weekend in the classics. This past weekend, he looked like he didn't even have a chain on his bike. So that's my biggest question, honestly. You talk about maybe a lack of talent in this race, but the talent that we do have is incredible with Jonas and Matteo. At the top, João Almeida, Ben O'Connor, Vlasov, Schelmos, McNulty, and Santiago Buitrago, who crashed late into Paris-Nice last year. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he could do after he already won in Valencia earlier this year.
I would have posed the question the other way with Vingegaard and Jorgenson, because I think Vingegaard will want to win this race.
Yeah.
And he hasn't won it, and of course Pogačar has, and therefore he might want to win it. And I think Matteo has got tremendous form at the moment. I think he's riding really, really well. He's got his tail up. I wouldn't think Vingegaard would openly attack Jorgenson at all. But on the other hand, unless he gets a little bit of luck to be in the right move, maybe to say, okay, I'm free to fly, I think this race is tailor-made for Vingegaard to win now. 2 tough mountaintop finishes. The team time trial, where his team should come out one of the strongest in the team time trial. It's not over a big distance, not a lot of time to gain, but you never know. You've got to look after your leader there. And then you've got a couple of sprint stages. There's some good sprinters in the race. And of course, as always, it finishes down in Nice, and the sun usually shines in late March down there. It's nice to see, because you feel really, really happy. Now, there's a couple of stages in the area of the Alpmara team, and the race has often been decided down there, and very often won by only seconds too, Paris-Nice. There's not always a big time gap at the finish, so you can't afford to make any mistakes, I don't think. I just can't see Vingegaard turning away the chance to level the chucker with Pogačar myself.
I agree. And I think if you look at the course itself, like you just mentioned, how much harder it is. And if you look at just the last 5 kilometers, there's 1,000 more feet climbing in just the last 5 kilometers of the finishes of these stages than there is in the previous edition. So just that alone makes it obviously a lot harder for a rider like Matteo. He's a bigger guy. I mean, he's 6'3", and you look at, Jonas, he looks like his little brother who's still in grade school. So it's for a guy like that, and just in stature alone, you'd have to really think about it. And the confidence as well, Phil. You talk about, for first of all, legacy, which you're bringing up, but second of all, it's just confidence going forward. Every little win here is just building blocks going towards a Tour de France, because that's ultimately what they care about. I mean, it's nice to win the Paris-Nice races and the classics we're going, but ultimately for a team like Visma, it's Tour de France. That's their ultimate focus for sure, that they really truly want to win. And so if they could get Jonas to win this and win it handily, and Matteo could win a stage or two, fantastic. But ultimately, that's what they want to have. Build that confidence, make sure that he is sharp, looking forward to July.
What we always forget, and it's often difficult to explain to the viewers who don't follow cycling every day, is that the sport is a team event, but the winner is one person. And the reason that is only one guy can win the Tour de France, only one guy can win Paris-Nice, but he needs the legs of his team to put him into those winning positions. Now we've got this situation where Jorgenson is on the top of his form very early in the season. Vingegaard appears to be having great form, and he's calming himself down in racing too much, like Pogacar always does the last couple of years. But he's a proud man, and he's always comparing himself to what Pogacar does. Pogacar's won, so he goes out and wins, as we had earlier in the last month, in February. And so they will know, and there'll be no animosity between the two of them. And I'm quite sure that Matteo Jorgenson would love to win this race and repeat, because only 3 Americans have ever won Paris-Nice, and Floyd Landis and Bobby Julich, the other 2. And he's become a superstar based on Paris-Nice last year. And surely they're going to discuss it. And I think that Vingegaard is a pretty nice guy. And I think he'll say, look, I want to win it, but you put yourself in a position and I can't do much about it, then I'll help you win it. And I think that will be the sort of discussion probably towards the end of the Paris-Nice, because at the beginning, it's every man puts himself in the positions to win it. And Jorgenson's got to be there as well. But we'll see. But, all the big names in the sport have won Paris-Nice in time. The great winner of all was the start of the winning season was Jacques Anquetil. And then Eddie Merckx came along, and he had a big problem in his only win in Paris-Nice because Tommy Simpson was a young whippersnapper who was clearly very, very good and did become Britain's first ever world road race champion. Tom was friendly with Eddie Merckx, but always wanted to beat him. And Eddie was just a young kid, 19 years of age. He didn't think anything of Tommy Simpson. It's worth recalling, though, that when Tommy sadly died at Mont Ventoux in the Tour de France in 1967, Eddie Merckx was the main cyclist who travelled to England to be at the funeral of Tommy. So it rather not on the, but not on the actual on the road itself. So let's have a look at the field then. If Vingegaard and Jorgenson are on the same team, they'll look to the team time trial. The course itself is a difficult one. It's always cold, especially in the middle of France. It's usually below freezing when the riders start. When you get to altitude, like where you won, St. Etienne, you often see the frost on the pine leaves in the middle of the afternoon because the sun doesn't get up that high. So, but then they're going to have to expect bad weather and a tough ride. And who's going to take on the likes of Visma?
Yeah, if I'm going to look at anyone, again, I'm looking down at Santiago Buitrago. Just the way he's been racing this year, the way he's climbing, more importantly, the way he got the better of João Almeida in Valencia. So that's one they were, earlier in Algarve. So I really like what I'm seeing with Buitrago. Almeida, fantastic rider. He's got a great team as well with the TTT. I think that's going to be interesting to see what happens earlier in that TTT. But if I'm looking at the course itself, you just mentioned that the massive central area, or more about in the middle, where you have that little bit of wet dampness everywhere and it's cold. I'm thinking stage number 5. Stage number 5 is really dangerous there, Phil. I mean, it's not a crazy amount of climbing in there, but still almost 9,000 feet of climbing over the course of almost 200 kilometers. And it's this day and age, we were talking a little bit earlier about it in the opening weekend, where you could make the differences. And then in the big stage races, they put massive climbs on there. And it's not as easy to really change the tactics of the race. But when you have little category 2s and 3s strewn about the entire stage, that's when you could really throw some serious Hail Mary passes and really try to play some different tactics. So I think if anywhere where Matteo could really change things up internally inside the team, that'd be the one day. Or other teams coming into the fore. Ben O'Connor, seeing what he's done off the front before, what he did in the Vuelta last year. Vlasov, Skelmos, McNulty, another American rider who was up there at the top last year. So, and he's riding very well right now. So there's a lot of cards we played. And, when you're talking about Visma, you have to also talk about UAE. You know, you have Joe Almeida and McNulty, both very strong riders, doing very well right now as well. So some of these stronger teams have a couple cards to play, and I think that stage 5 is going to be the one day to watch. I think that's where it could really go completely sideways. And like you said, Phil, the weather, you just don't know. I mean, it could be beautiful, it could be horrible, but I would assume that at some point in time, we even had it so many times with the race to the sun, and it's freezing cold when we got to Nice and raining sideways. So you just never know what you're going to get.
Now, on that climb, on that stage, we finish up a climb I confess I've never seen. I don't know it. La Loge des Gars. Do you know it at all, Christian?
I do not. I do not. I mean, I say that a lot though until I actually drive there, and then I'm like, oh, I've been here before, but I don't think so.
Yeah, the trouble is, the Paris-Nice being the first race here, the race goes to the smaller areas because it feels it can cope with the situations, and that's why everybody loves, all the journalists love to pack on the Paris-Nice, because they always get a good story from the race. Now, we've mentioned the potential winners there. There's plenty. There are 3 stages potentially, I think, for the sprinters this year, and the sprinters. What do you reckon?
Tim Merlier. I mean, and then second after that is Alexander Kristoff. I mean, that's crazy to think Alexander Kristoff. He's 37 years old. I had to look it up this morning. I'm like, how? He's one of the only, no, he's probably the only sprinter that I actually raced with during my career, and he's still ticking. He's still doing fantastic. He just won a race just a couple of weeks ago. So Axel Zingler, Sam Welsford, Mads Pedersen, Danny Van Poppel. There's some good riders, and you have to always think, and it's such a tough race. It's such a stressful race. It's such a fast race that it's not a lot of times the fastest of sprinters winning the stages here. It's the guys who have the resistance. So the Mads Pedersens of the world, the Kristoffs, and Tim Merlier, I put him in the camp of being a pure sprinter. You see him on the dead flat roads. He has a amazing eye for the sprint, a lot like Mark Cavendish, where he knows where to be when he needs to be there before it even happens many times. And I think he just has that second sense. So I would think that Tim Merlier is going to be able to pop one off. But after that, who knows? I really don't know who's going to be up there to the front. It's a matter of the crosswinds. It's a matter of the weather. It's a matter of who has their team put together in that crosswinds, if there is crosswinds, and then of course the lead out. So I like Welsford a lot. He's been flying early season, but to be able to change your body, you go racing in the sun to racing in 2 or 3 degrees in France, your body just doesn't react. I mean, you can be flying when it's 80, 90 degrees like we see in the summertime, but when you change it around in France, yeah, things definitely change. So I agree with you. I think that we're going to see 3-ish sprints, depending if there might be a breakaway, but I think that is going to be more or less almost a certainty. The first and second days for sure, but they always have the circuits filled. There's always those kind of dangers. I'm excited about it. This is always the kickoff to the year. You have this in Treno, then you have, of course, Milan-San Remo. We had opening weekend, and now it just starts to build. We've been deprived for cycling for so long. That's why we always get excited for Paris-Nice when it comes knocking. And I think this is not going to be any different than the years past. It might be even one of the better editions of Paris-Nice.
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, when I used to cover the event, I was so happy to be at the start line in Paris. Everybody was, the season starts again. All the journalists couldn't wait to report, and the riders couldn't wait to race. But Paris it can be a tough ride. And as Paul Sherwin always said, it's bloody hard, mate. It's probably the hardest race we ride all year, because everybody believes a new season, they're going to win. And therefore the speed is usually up. Now, Tim Merlier did disappoint over the weekend. Whether he got boxed out in all those kind of sprints, I don't know. But I was surprised he didn't win. For example, I expect him to win the Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne, but he was down the list. So whatever happened in the bustle of the sprint put him out of position. But they're all saying he is now the fastest finisher on the circuit. He's got to prove it, though, and he's already proving it right now this year. But I think there will be times for him. But when you come to Mads Pedersen, he's not just a pure sprinter. He can go with them, and he can put himself in a position. Now, sprinters can win Paris-Nice. There's no question about it. Sean Kelly won it 7 times straight, and he did that because he was able to hang on the hills and put his sprint home in the sprint finish. I'll tell you a funny story about Sean when he won one of those stages. There was a crash in the last kilometre It was the last kilometre in those days in the sprint, and Kelly was caught out in it. And they docked him, I think it was 10 seconds, because they said he was outside the last kilometre. Sean Kelly put the commissaires in a car and drove them to the last kilometre and said, "Show me where I fell," because he didn't believe he was outside the last kilometre. Now, I can't remember whether he got his time back, but he did win the race overall. See, 10 seconds was vital, because in those days when Kelly was winning, he was talking seconds. And he won 7 times straight, which of course is the record and still is to this day. I don't think anybody will win 7 Paris-Nice in a straight row ever again. But okay, so let's round it up then. I'm going to go for Vingegaard winning. And I don't think his teammate Jorgenson will be too far behind, because the team time trial is going to put them, if they do well in the team time trial, right up on the leaderboard before they get to the climbs. And that's going to be a real incentive for those two guys to podium together. And that might solve the problem too, mightn't it?
You didn't exactly go on a limb out there with Jonas winning that race. I mean, he's definitely the favorite going for everybody. But I mean, if I'm going to go with anyone apart from Jonas, I'll have to go for the reigning champion with Matteo. Of course, I'm crazy biased by saying that, of course, as being a friend and American, looking forward to seeing Matteo ride as well as he did last year. Brandon McNulty, I think, will be up there as well if I'm going to continue my bias. But stopping with that, João Almeida, I think he's going to be great. And I also think that Santiago Buitrago, who I mentioned earlier, I think these are the guys that we're really going to have to focus on. And of course, if I'm talking about the actual stage itself, apart from the team time trial, and, speaking of the team time trial, Phil, every year I think they're going to be the differences are going to be massive. They're not. There really aren't that big of a difference in between the teams that we think they're going to just sweep the floor with everybody else. That doesn't happen anymore. The level, again, just like we're talking about with what happened in Kern, Brussels, Kern, and Omloop, it's just so deep that to make those kind of differences, you have to be really fine-tuned, especially in your craft with team time trial. But apart from that, though, I think it's really going to be this one stage, that stage number 5. That's where things could go pear-shaped. And of course, over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday is always great racing to behold. And stage number 7 is the hardest stage easily. And stage number 8, going into Nice, going to Ketchaman, Col de Pay. There's such great nostalgia. And, I'm glad you brought up Paul Sherwin saying that how hard this race was, because, if I'm honest, I hated this race. I absolutely hated being at that race. I mean, of course, I have great memories of winning stages and doing good for my teammates. But man, for the most part, I mean, the amount of stress that you go through just to finish these sprint stages, and it doesn't look like much on television. But when you're packed in there like sardines, it's freezing cold, you're standing on the line and it's raining. It's just not a nice experience many times. It's a really, like Paul said, a very hard race. I mean, I would set new records on my power meter almost every day, where it really doesn't look like anything much, but you are absolutely flying. And to your point, everyone is so excited about it. They've been training so hard since last year, and you want to make the difference. You want to show everyone your worth early in the season. Will it pay off? It's going to pay off for somebody, but for many, it's not going to pay off, and you're going to be long forgotten by the time the Tour de France rolls around. But it's part of the stepping stones. It's part about getting that confidence going. See where you stand within the peloton. How was your homework within your team? Have you personally, and then go forward from there. If you're winning, great. Just keep on doing what you've been doing. If you're not, you got to go back to the drawing board. You got a couple more months until the big races happen. You better get your P's and Q's in line real quick. So Don Felipe, I think that's about it for Paris-Nice. There's going to be, like we said, 8 days of racing, and the weather, it's going to be like a box of chocolates as usual. And Jonas, I mean, honestly, if he doesn't win it, I think it would be a surprise at this point in time.
I agree. 2 Americans, though. I like McNulty. He was 3rd last year, and he's got all the ability to win over this course as well. He's a good team around him. The UAE team is not sending all the top 5 with them. And they've got another team with Adam Yates over in Tirreno Adriatico, which starts shortly after. And that's a good. You either love the French race or you hate it, and the same with Tirreno Adriatico. You either love it or you hate it. But each year they seem to change allegiance and they switch sides. And the riders suddenly say, "No, I'm going to Tirreno this year," and then the guy say, "No, I'm going back to Paris-Nice." It's almost like they're trying to do tap dance to avoid each other because they don't want their form compared by riding the same races. Mind you, Pogacar's not riding either of them, so that's life.
Yeah, can't blame them. Can't blame them at all. Yeah, I mean, when they did go head to head, that was a big surprise, and that was a lot of fun to watch. But it really didn't matter. You know, of course, Jonas did get beaten up pretty bad there by Pogacar that year, but he ended up winning the Tour de France anyway. So, you know, you can read into it all you want. It doesn't really matter until July, when the big race happens. But this is a great precursor, just like the Dauphiné is beforehand. It's always nice to race on the flat in the team time trial. And it's great to see the team time trial back. It's my favorite event, and I can't wait for Barcelona in 2026 to have the first stage be a team time trial, just kick off the Tour de France. So that's going to be really, really fun. And with the same kind of format that they've been testing here at Paris-Nice. This is the first time they did something like this, where usually it's the fourth rider or the fifth rider, depending on how many riders you have started the race. That's the time that you get when you come across the line. Now it's just whoever you get to the finish line, that's your time coming across the line. And it does finish on a climb yet again, Phil, here. So that's going to be interesting to see as well, like how they work it out. But I don't think that, 10 seconds lost, 12 seconds lost at the very most in the team time trial. I don't think that's where this race is going to be won and lost. But it's going to be close. Like you said, not many times, it's not much, is it, coming into Nice, where the differences could be a handful of seconds, or, last year was a little bit bigger margin, and Matteo didn't even have to try too hard over Remco. He just sat on his wheel, let him win the stage. Well, I think this year will be a lot different.
Okay, well, remember, you can see it here, Bob Roll and Christian van der Velde call all of the action throughout on Peacock, so enjoy the race, guys. I'll be watching on Peacock as well. And let's not forget to mention the other two Americans in the race, Nielsen Paulus, because for me he's a really exciting bike rider. And I think you might be calling his name a few times during the show. And also, I've seen a lot of Magnus Sheffield this year around the world. He started out his career this year in the Tour Down Under in Australia. And he actually said good morning in a polite English accent to me when he was riding towards the start of the stage. So I really thought it was an Englishman. With a name like Sheffield, you would think he was English, wouldn't you? As it's a fine city here in the UK. All right, everybody. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the chat, and we'll be back beyond the podium the next time. Goodbye for now.
For all your cycling content year-round, subscribe to NBC Sports YouTube page. We got it all.